So last night I ended up playing a cast session. I'm going to start playing a lot of those more because I've just been finding that late night I've been liking the Zoom sessions. So got in about 500 hands. Only took like 2.5 hours just playing one table of Zoom, so that's pretty awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go over the hands in review, just a few of them, and then we'll get right into the next course. So I opened a 2.5 in first. This is a great first hand to review. I get 3-bet on the button, and if you're going to go through the standard, then we can see. Actually, let me do this. Let's take the HUD off. Okay. Um, so if you want to go through and see if you're getting 10-1, then it costs you 6 to call to win. What is that? 17, 18 and a half. So you're already getting 3-1. The player behind obviously has more than that, so we can absolutely call 100% of the time here. We go ahead and call and flop the 3, and it's actually a pretty good flop because the ace is going to be very common for a 3-better. There's flush draws out there, but I'm not really going to worry about that unless 4 flush cards come off, and I do have one in my hand to kind of make that less likely. This is a spot where players freak out, overbet, and lose value. So I just check. Player bets a third pot. Doesn't really mean anything. I mean, it should mean an ace, but it could be less. So we just call, obviously. 8 on the turn. Really still not worried about it. I mean, yes, suited ace of hearts is out there, but again, it's just a great way to lose value. So I check. It goes check, check, and the river is the absolute gin nuts. The quads come out. So now it's an interesting situation, right? Because let's say this player has ace king, right? He could have bet the flop. Maybe he's up against ace queen. Yeah, true, blah, blah, blah. Or maybe he's up against a flush draw. And if I had check called down with a flush draw, something like jack 10 of spades, I definitely could have had that. I could have had king 10, king jack, all the suited spades I could have had. So if he doesn't have the king of spades in his hand, I can definitely have them all. So with this coming off, it leads to 2 possible bluffs. 1, bluffing the flush draw, just representing a 3 or an ace. And 2, a chop. Because if I have ace jack, or if my opponent's on the button with ace jack, and I bet just monstrous, right? If I have an ace, even if it doesn't play, like if I have the suited, ace 5 of clubs, it's very likely that neither of our aces will play. So in that instance, it's a good move to bet and bet large because the player, it's a free shot at a bluff. Now, some players know that. So it kind of works both ways. So I decided to go ahead and try to make this look as bluffy as possible. And I just very quickly, maybe 2 seconds after the card came out, just bet the full pot. Looking back, I probably should have bet more. I probably should have bet about 45 blinds into this. Just do the total over bet. Statistically, I think. Statistically. In this particular hand, my opponent wouldn't have the ace to be able to call me. But I think that the small screw up is not betting 45 on the river. I think 30 gets paid by the queen or the ace. I think 45. I think even sometimes, depending on the player, up to 2 times the pot, 60 blinds will get paid on the river. So when you get a rare hand, you need to make a rare play, I think. But I think in this particular instance, my full pot bet got called because it just looked like I had a flush draw, right? But honestly, I'm playing ace king the same way. I'm playing ace queen the same way. So versus me, this king queen's never going to win because I'm never going to be bluffing in this scenario. Like, I'm not bluffing a flush draw in this scenario on the river when I miss. Just hell no. So that was a fun one. Pocket jacks in first. I get 3-bet again. A lot of 3-bet going on last night. Worked out well for me for a while and then didn't. I called. Flop comes off. Queen 8-3. Yeah, there's a queen, but again, players freak out. It's not necessary. Player bets half pot, approximately. This doesn't really mean anything. Just like in tournaments, this half pot bet, unless he's going to do it multiple times, doesn't really mean anything on the flop. Like, if he had something, pretty good, he should be betting less or more. It's just not great. If he's bluffing, he should bet way more. So this half pot just usually looks like bleh. It's just nothing. It's a non-move. So I call, check on the turn, and I decide to go ahead and value bet the river. I'm pretty confident that my queen's always good here, and he just folds. And it's fine. I think it's good to bet here because I don't think we're going to get another bluff. I think this is one where we could look like we had a flush draw on the flop, but more than likely because we opened and he 3-bet, we're just going to have a queen, and I don't want to show down unnecessarily. So I really don't think I was going to get bluffed at here, so I decided just to bet it myself. And sometimes you do get called by the, pocket tens, ace highs, hands like that I beat, but just think I was on a flush draw. Like, depends on the level of player. Pocket jacks again. I decided to 3-bet this one because I got raised in the cutoff, called on the button. I decided to 3-bet pretty big, and here's the real thing. This player has 30 blinds, so I'm raising enough that I'm trying to scare this player. So at this point in the hand, if the player just calls and this player jams, I can rejam. That's the whole point here. He does just call, which is kind of interesting. He took a very long time to do it, too, like a very long time. And I was thinking that it's some kind of pair. I didn't know if it was a big pair or a little pair, but it definitely wasn't a hand like ace-king, ace-queen, because, we're just going to go ahead and he's going to squeeze out the middle player and 4-bet. This, to me, was a pair all day. I just couldn't figure out if it was aces or if it was some kind of middling pair. The target actually folds, which is annoying. Flop comes off, and I have the overpair. I decide to bet, and this is enough. This is about 2/3 pot, a little less than that. This is enough, to decide what's going on with our hand. If I get raised, obviously, I should be beat. Getting called can be beat too, but it kind of depends what comes off. He does just call. 7 on the turn doesn't really do anything. I decide to check, and now the opponent bets 22.50, and to me, this was kind of not the greatest scenario because I'm going to be up against a set here, which is now a full house, quite often. 8s and 4s are definitely in the range. There are some hands like the suited ace-7, but more so than that, I think I'm really worried about, aces right here. This is definitely a spot where if you had aces, you just really wouldn't worry about it because you'd be feeling like you were up against an overpair. I did decide to call this one because I didn't want to fold to one turn of aggression from the opponent because it is possible he has a hand like 9s or 10s, so I didn't want to give up the ghost just quite that quickly. It kind of depends what happens on the river. And I said he could have something like 9s in game, and then a 9 popped off, and I was like, why did I fucking say it? So now this board has become one of the worst boards for me. I feel like it's one of those things where I could have definitely been behind pre-flop, but now any 9, any 8, any pair or any 9s, any 8s, queens, kings, aces. I think queens is unlikely because I think a lot of players would 4-bet that. They would definitely 4-bet kings, but aces, people take that out of the 4-betting range because of the fact of it's so strong. There's really no reason at any point in position here to raise with aces like this player did. I mean, we've built up 100 big blind pot, and, that's a pot-sized bet. So I check, and he bets 74 blinds. The interesting thing is here, I think if you're going to have aces, I think you're more likely to get called just jamming all in. Just because players won't fold over pairs often enough. To me, this just screams that I'm beat. I really don't know by what. If you had to put a gun to my head, I would say aces, absolutely, or kings. I mean, but kings, though, I feel like players freak out a little bit more because they're worried about an ace coming out. So I kind of put this guy on a very narrow range, but I feel like I'm definitely beat. So I just folded it. And, yeah, all good. Ace-2 suited. I raise, get 3-bet. This is a very annoying hand because I believe I set up a very powerful, profitable bluff. And it would have worked. Player bets out 1/3 pot, which is fine. I expect him to have a pair sometimes, but unless he has exactly a king, I felt like a king should bet bigger, but honestly, unless he has exactly king queen, or pocket fives, which is very unlikely, or pocket queens, I feel like this bet is too small. I feel like in this scenario he should be betting more because I'm on the button, man. There's draws, whatever. I decided to float him to see what happens. The deuce comes off, and that's actually an okay card for me. Not just because it makes me a pair, but because it keeps the board very dry. So he's going to be representing one pair of hands. He decides to check now. Definitely a player could do this with a king. I think, though, if you have ace-king and you've taken this initiative, you're going to make the big bet here. You're not going to check two pair or a set here. So I felt like whatever it was, he was very weak. I decided to go ahead and bet on the turn 2/3 pot. This is how you set up these moves. He takes a super long time and then calls. And then the river comes off, and he has 78. I have 86. There's 84 in the middle. The only bet left is all in, and I've set it up perfectly. He checks, and I snap. I took like 3 seconds and then went all in, and he absolutely snap called me, and you're gonna see why. This would have worked, I think, about 90% of the time. This bluff versus one pair, it would have worked. This was a 3-outer. If any card comes on the river, any card that doesn't pair the board, I really think I can win this one. It's just ridiculous. Like if a 10, a jack, an ace, obviously an ace gives me the best hand. Any card but a 9 or a king, and I think I win this one all day. This is just unfortunate. And the fact of the matter is, he was going to check this down. This is a player who didn't think it out. You know what I'm saying? He 3-bet pre-flop. He bet the flop. He didn't like that I kept going. He tried to give up. I bet the turn. So like if I just have ace king here, I'm going to bust him all day long. And that's exactly the way I would play ace king in this scenario. I'd also play king queen. I'd play a set. I'd play a 10 jack this way. All those hands would get played this way. So there wasn't a thought in this player's head. All they know is they don't know how to fold two pair. So when that's the case, I just need anything but a 3-outer to come off, and I'm good. And if the king comes off, I don't bet because I'm not going to try to represent, the least likely card on the board. So it's literally a 3-outer for this guy to get paid. So it's very unlikely. I actually think it's closer to 95% successful in this scenario if an 8 comes off on the river. A jack is actually great for my bluffing range. So it's pretty crazy. Frustrating, but I wanted to review it, and I did run the numbers after the stream last night on that one, and I was correct. It's going to succeed. It said 92% of the time, but I think it's actually higher in-game. I decided to raise out of the small blind here, my standard 3.5 open raise, get an 8. There's no real reason to believe that the other player has a king, so I'm going to be starting to betting for value. This is a little smaller than if I was just bluffing from the small. If I'm bluffing from the small, I'm probably going to go 5 1/4, because that would be your standard here. I went a little smaller for value. Backdoor flush draw, overcard, second pair, pretty good. I get called. 8 on the turn is absolute gin, and I decided to start looking like a bluff, so I bet a round number. Players do this when they're trying to make a statement. When you start typing in bets, it does something to the other player where they go 10. Why are you betting 10 and not 10.4 or something like that? Like, it's a very precise thing, so it looks over planned. So you can actually use this against players when they do this and raise these bets. But I was trying to just get called because I felt like this player was super weak. Like, I don't think he has a king. I think I'm getting called by like a gut shot or ace high. So check again. River comes off. Now I go for this big bet. Again, I typed it in. It's right around 2/3 pot. And this betting structure just doesn't make sense to this guy. So that's what I was trying to do, was create a hero call scenario. And I did. And he called me with a 4. I guarantee you he was thinking, well, I'll call a bet on the flop, but if if I don't get any help on the turn, I'm just going to fold. And then the best card for him comes off, and he just decided to give me another 45 blinds. It's pretty crazy, or 37 blinds, whatever it was. So this is a good amount of, or a good structured betting that kind of confused the opponent and made him try to hero call me. 56. I had to go ahead and defend. Get a pretty regular. Now you can see this is almost the same flop, right? 4-9 king. The other one was 4-8 king. And this player now bets super small. This is nothing. This is I raised and I'm gonna bet. So I go ahead and float it. The turn comes off. I pick up a gut shot, and then this board is almost exactly the same. Just this 8 needs to change. He checks, of course, showing me weakness. I go ahead and bet now, pouncing on that, and he folds. Don't make small, stupid bets. That's the lesson there. 8-9. I raise, I get called, flop a whole bunch of 9s. That's pretty good. Player checks. I decide to now make this stupid small bet. Right? I mean, like, I'm doing this to get called. Flushes can come off, but whatever. 7 on the turn, pick up the open ender. I decide to bet big now, real big. Little over 2/3 pot. I do get called. River comes off a queen. Pretty safe for me, right? He should never have spades here or like 85. So he checks, and I decide to go ahead and bet half pot, just trying to get called by something because I've kind of bet the whole way. In game, actually, I think I could have gotten more. That being said, this was a very passive player. And here's the thing. If you're going to call these bets and not make an aggressive action like check raising or taking the lead or betting the river, you're just leaving value on the table because why should I ever have a 9? Why? Like, this was just fear. There was no logical reason for him to think I have a 9. He should have been check raising me, honestly. But in this particular instance, it was the right move, but through no fault of his own. Last one of these, ace queen offsuit. I raise, I get called, flop the queen, decide to go ahead and make the ultra small bet. This player had been kind of tight, so I decided I kind of need to string him. Get called. Now, watch this. Player bets the full pot at me. Usually when this happens, this is somebody who has picked up massive equity. So I bet super small on the flop to keep his range wide and kind of try to make these things happen. So if he has 4-5, you know what I'm saying, he's not going anywhere. Could he have ace-5? Sure. Could he have 5-6? Sure. Could he have 3-5? Yeah. Could he have, ace-3? Yeah. He could have all these hands that now turned equity with a straight draw. I think it's rare that this is two pair, just because why would you bet this? You would let me continue betting, and then you would check raise the turn. So this just doesn't make much sense if you actually have a good hand. I decided to just call it, one, because I wasn't 100% sure yet, because the player was very tight. I hadn't seen anything yet, but then I kind of realized I hadn't seen any showdowns either, so maybe he was just betting on boards. The river comes off, pairing the board, pretty good. If a 3 had come off, I would kind of hate it, but a deuce is kind of better. Unless he has exactly deuce 4 or deuce 3, it's more likely for him, I think, to have hands like 3-5 and 3-4. And if he had 3-4, he just got counterfeited. You know what I'm saying? And now he just makes a full pot bet. And to me, this just seemed like a very poor play that was turning its hand into a bluff. When I see this size of a bet on the river, this to me screams, I had something good. It's now screwed. Like he had 3-4, and I'm turning my hand into a bluff. So I just went ahead and called it, and just a stone airball bluff. And like I said, this player had done some weird shit, and but he just seemed very tight. I think from this point out, players just picked him apart. It was kind of bad news for him after that, because we all kind of saw a showdown and went, oh, you do dumb shit. So I believe he was tight pre-flop, but then he fought tooth and nail for every pot, which is good, but you have to have some logic behind it. You can't just bet big for no reason. So that was all the hands from the Zoom session last night. That one's posted on YouTube if you want to check it out. Let's move on to the next pre-flop topic. 22 to 35 big blinds in tournaments. And let me adjust the sound here. What's going on here? Why is my desktop audio not working? Or maybe it's just because nothing's on. Hang on, can I... Oh, I see what's happening. Okay. I might have to mess with the sound settings a little bit, guys, but we'll see what happens. All right, so let's get started on this. When folded to 22 to 35 big blinds. So again, pre-flop, right? folded to us, this is what we're doing, 22 to 35.
Now that you know how to play when you have more than 35 big blinds, let's now discuss when you get a little bit shallower to when you have between 22 and 35 big blinds. And as with the other situations, we'll be discussing when everyone folds to you first. So now your stack to pot ratio is going to continue to decrease, right? Whenever you're in a single raised pot, let's just think about this, right? Let's say you do start with 25 big blinds. In this scenario, if you raise to 2 or 2.25 big blinds, and let's just say the big blind calls, the pot's going to be, we'll call it 6 big blinds. So that's going to leave you with about 22 big blinds in your stack divided by the 6 big blinds in the pot, which is going to give you about a 4 stack to pot ratio. If you raise from middle position in the button calls, now the pot's going to be a little bit bigger. That'll give you like a 3 stack to pot ratio. So you're right on the cusp between the low and the medium stack to pot ratio. If you happen to play a 3-bet pot, like if you raise to 2 big blinds and someone makes it 5 or 6 and you call, then obviously you're in the low stack to pot ratio category, which essentially means that if you get any reasonably strong hand, either before the flop or after the flop, very often you will be happy getting your entire stack in. And a lot of people think that once we get down to this stack size, that we're basically playing bingo. But that is not true at all. You will find that a lot of players really make substantial mistakes as we continue to get shallower. So understand, your standards for going all in will decrease as the stack to pot ratio continues to decrease. And that's because you're just not risking all that much to win whatever's in the pot, which means you get to be wrong or you get to lose more often, and it's just okay.
So here's the thing. It's later in the tournament when these situations come up the most. But the thing of it is, it's not, you don't have as much to work with, is what he's saying. So let's say you're on a 1-2 game and you buy in with $100 and you raise pre-flop and somebody calls and you have king queen and the flop comes off, king 4 and 5, right? And you bet and the person raises and you call and then the turn comes off, you check, and then they bet your entire fucking stack, right? They bet 80 fucking blinds. You can kind of throw the king queen away and not even think about it. Same scenario in that 1-2 cash game. You just took a beat. You have $25 in front of you. You have king queen. You raise to $5, right? Somebody calls it. The flop comes off king 5-4, right? There's now $10 in the pot, right? Or 11 if the big blind called and the small blind folded. There's $11 in the pot. You only have $20 left. You bet $7 or $5 into the pot, and the person jams all in. You are very happy getting in your last $15 because you're like, well, I don't have that much to risk. You know what I'm saying? Even though you're deeper in the tournament, that thought process has to prevail. You have to understand that when you're that low, you're going to be all in more often. And if you're not, you're never going to get to the point where you're not all in more often, because being all in more often there with the king queen, you're going to have, you're going to be in a great spot to double up, versus a player with because you didn't get 3-bet, right? A lot of times it's going to be king jack, it's going to be king 10, it's going to be a straight draw, it's going to be, on that king 5-4 board. There's going to be a lot of hands that are going to just put you in and put pressure on you, and you have the goods in this scenario. So you're not going to just fold here. So that's what we're talking about. That's why we think about things in terms of big blinds versus chips, because it's only the number of blinds that matters. You know what I'm saying? If you're playing a 1-2 game and all of a sudden it becomes a 5-10 game, well, your $100 went from being 50 blinds to 10 blinds. So it's a much different scenario. That's what's happening in tournaments. So just that's the way to look at this situation.
You are going to have big swings whenever you do get down to this stack depth, meaning you're just going to be all in sometimes, and when you're all in, well, you're out at least some portion of the time. So again, implied odds hands are going to continue to decrease in value, especially when it comes to calling pre-flop raises, and that's just because you're not going to realize your implied odds very well. And the big cards will go up in value. Like ace jack offsuit's actually pretty decent with the stack size because top pair, top kicker is pretty good. So especially from out of position, you're going to be incentivized to go all in more often. If someone raises and you're out of position, you're going to see here that if you have something reasonable, you're going to want to be jamming. And this is because this reduces or basically mitigates your positional disadvantage. Okay, so with this stack depth, you're going to want to make sure you generally follow the GTO charts unless it becomes clear your opponents are doing something wrong. And you're going to find that if your opponents are not jamming nearly often enough, you can raise with a wider range. However, if your opponents are jamming on you a lot, like you raise to 2.25 big blinds, they just shove it all in for 25, if that's happening frequently, then you should actually tighten up a bit. So your strategy in this situation really does heavily depend on your opponent, because compared to when you raise and someone 3-bets and you call, that's a situation where you can get out of line a little bit, because calling a pre-flop 3-bet, getting good odds, especially if you're in position, really isn't that big of a deal. But now, if you make it 2 or 2.5 big blinds and your opponent goes all in, you have to fold unless you just have something good, right? So you really do want to be focusing heavily on your opponent. And you will find that for that reason, a lot of the deep stacked concepts we've discussed previously no longer apply, because now we are playing a game where when you raise, you're going to get jammed on, compared to when you raise, you're going to face a small 3-bet. So let's look at default opening ranges in this scenario. You're generally going to find that these ranges tighten up a little bit, and that's because, again, whenever you raise, you're usually not going to be facing a small 3-bet, and if you are, it's still going to be for something like a third of your stack. So compared to the deeper stacks where you got to play roughly 50% of hands from the button, you see now you only get to play about 46% of hands from the button, which is a little bit tighter. Interestingly enough, the small pairs are actually not all that good. And the reason is because if you raise and someone jams on you, you should fold. In that scenario, usually you're going to be having something like 43, 44% equity, something like that. And that's just not good enough to call in a lot of these situations. So in these scenarios, you're more incentivized to raise with just good big blocker hands. Like you'll see these big offsuit cards just go up in value a little bit, but the small pairs go down in value. Notice the suited connectors typically go down in value a bit. And that's roughly what you're going to want to be raising with. Let's compare this to the deeper stacked. Let's take a look at the button, 46.3% of hands. When we're playing 40 big blinds deep, notice you're playing more pairs, right? You're playing all the pairs. When you're a little bit deeper stacked, you're playing 50% of hands, so a decent amount more. Notice even like ace-2 offsuit, ace-3 offsuit are folding in this scenario. Again, if your opponents will just frequently fold to your initial pre-flop raise and rarely go all in, you can definitely raise all the ace-X's and all the small pairs from the button. But if you're going to get jammed on a lot, you just don't even want to open these hands. It's just not worth the risk. It is okay to fold with the stack depth. I know that seems very, very tight, but it is what you should be doing if your opponents are going to respond well. Let's take a look at the low jack seat, 24.1% of hands with this 25 big blind stack depth, about the same. With deeper stacks, let's look at under the gun. With deeper stacks, we're at 16%. With shallower stacks, we're at 16%. Again, you're going to find that you typically just get to play a few more hands from the earlier positions, and that's just because you're going to be able to realize your equity decently well. If you get top pair with even like King 7 suited or King Jack offsuit, you're happy enough putting your money in. So again, you do not have to memorize these charts, but understand the principles that come from them. A few things that a lot of people may not be aware of is like every suited ace maybe should not be played from the early positions. The small pairs, like 5s and lower, are weaker than you may think they are. Ace-X offsuit is probably weaker than you may think it is. And stuff like King X suited, or King 8 suited, King 7 suited, Queen 8 suited, these hands are probably a little bit better than you may think they are. All right, let's take a look at the small blind strategy. Again, the small blind strategy depends entirely on the big blind's response. If they're just going to fold frequently, you should be raising frequently. If they're going to be calling every time, well, you don't want to raise nearly as often, and you want to raise very linear. If they're going to be jamming on you every time you raise, you just want to raise with just the best hands, right? So always adjust to whatever your opponents are doing incorrectly. So let's take a look and compare these two charts. 25 big blinds deep, you see we're raising what appears to just be a bit more of a polarized range to some extent, minus like the absolute worst hands. And then we're just limping all of these hands that flop reasonably well. Notice that we do have a few open shoves for 25 big blinds from the small blind. As we get even shallower, you're going to find that we want to start shoving more hands like this, like the small pairs, the ace-X offsuit, etc. But we'll look into that as we get shallower stacked. If you wanted to just make your strategy simple in this scenario, perhaps you should just raise the ace-8 offsuit and limp the 3s and 2s. I think that's certainly viable. I don't think you have to use this small frequency all in. Notice it's only 1.8% of total hands. You're going to find that whenever you're looking at any sort of game theory optimal strategy, if a play happens at an incredibly low frequency, it's probably okay to just not use that bet size. But again, this is straight up profitable, and it's going to be slightly more profitable by using this strategy than it would be if you limped with 3s and 2s and jammed the ace, or raised the ace-8 offsuit. It is also worth mentioning in this scenario we are open raising a little bit more as we get shallower, and that's because winning the pot immediately becomes very, very valuable. Also, we're just playing more hands, right? And
the thing you have to remember too is we're in the small blind. We're raising still to 3.5 big blinds. That is the raise from the small blind. You have to get down to like 15 big blinds before you're not open raising to 3.5, and at that point you're just ripping. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and here's the thing. So it's easy to define. Hey, what's up, DeBaus? Good to see you, my man. Brand new follower. Got you last night on that Zoom stream. Glad to see you're awake. You're East Coast, so you were up late last night too. But good to see you, my man. I'm glad you stuck around. And this is what I was talking about. The Jonathan Little site. We're going through we just started the 22 to 35 big blind pre-flop tournament range. Gets pretty intense, but it's very important to learn.
Playing 1% more hands may not seem like a lot, but it is a little bit, and you'll find that every little bit does help. What a lot of people do incorrectly is they'll just study one chart, like the 40 big blind, small blind versus big blind chart, and think, all right, this is all I really need to do is just memorize this one and I'm good to go. It's going to be close enough. And to be fair, it's pretty close, but if you do get just a little bit more precise, you're going to find that your win rate does continue to go up. So again, you don't have to memorize these charts, but definitely reference them while you're playing until it sort of becomes second nature for you just to know what you do in these scenarios. And once you know what to do in these scenarios, you'll be able to use logic at the table to adjust properly to whatever your opponents do incorrectly.
And when he says reference them at the table, he means after you act. If you are referencing these before you act online, you are then violating terms of service of your poker site, and you could be banned. I am a streamer. I am on stream. It would be very easy to catch me if I were doing that. I do not do that. If I decide to make a raise and it's speculative and I want to look it up, I will look it up live on stream and show me opening up the chart. So, and here's the thing, you're going to be able to learn things like, what's the raise? Well, I'm going to raise 8-8 here, but I'm just going to limp 7-7. You know what I'm saying? So you don't have to memorize every one of these hands. You just have to memorize 8-8 plus. And, what am I going to raise here as a bluff? Queen 3, 4-3, suited, things like that. I can just keep those few hands in my head at this stack size and know. You know what I'm saying? And like he said, throwing out the very low percentage plays, this only happens 2% of the time that you have an all-in here. You can probably just do away with it. Like, it's just so rarely going to be the most profitable play 2% of the time that, fuck that. Like, why even bother? You're making it too complicated. But this is just the straight GTO worked out by a supercomputer answer. But if we stuck to everything else and threw out the all-ins, in the real world, I think we would do just fine. Let's do the quiz. 25 deep, everyone folds 2 in the low jack with queen jack off. Well, this is a very easy answer. This is how we look it up. We go to this is the same site. I'm just bringing up another window. This is the tools, GTO tournament preflop charts. And if you don't have a poker coaching premium membership, you can still get this one on their basic membership that's free. I'm not sponsored by them. I just really believe in them. We're in the low jack, 25 big blinds in the low jack. We're raising first in queen jack offsuit. I believe the question was, yep, queen jack offsuit. We can look it up and see that it is a raise 100% of the time. So we are going to raise, and we're still going to raise to 2.5. You could make it 2 big blinds, but honestly, well, no, because it's queen jack. Huh, interesting. I mean, at this stage of the tournament, the raises should be smaller, but I'm probably going like 2.3, so I forget what his recommendation is. Maybe I just go with what the table says. So let's go 2. Yeah, okay, 2 big blinds, that's fine. 2.5 isn't bad either. It's just that it's a little bit bigger, so when you get 3-bet, you kind of want to have a hand that you're committed to, so maybe you do that with king, queen or something if you want to vary your raise size, but usually not a good idea to vary your raise size at all, so 2 big blinds is fine. If the average stack is 25, 2 is enough. 25 deep, everyone folds to the cutoff with 7-5 suited. Okay. That's a fold. Because we don't, I'm going to look it up, but it's a fold because we don't have enough implied odds. We need 20 to 1 to play suited connectors. And we don't even have 20 to 1 in our stack. If we raise, that's already 2 blinds. We need to have at least 40 in our own stack to be able to do that. So it was the cutoff, right? 7-5 suited. Where is it? There it is, right there. See, that's a good question because it's the line. 7-6 suited, you can raise. 7-5 suited, no. And like he said, in game, you can probably just do away with the 7-6 because it's not as big of a loss. If your opponents behind are going to defend or 3-bet quite a bit, if they're not, you can raise wider. You can go down to 7-5. You can go down to 8-5, 9-6, 5-4. If they're just going to fold the majority of the time, you can make those plays. So it's a fold. Shorter stack depths, these type of hands go down in value. Right. We're only really opening them for their steal value, and sometimes somebody defends and we get to flop some equity. That's cool, but mostly we're looking to steal there when we open. 25 deep, everyone folds 2 on the button with 8-4 suited. Both players in the blinds are loose and splashy. This is a fold for a lot of reasons. Maybe it's a call, but let's look and see what the chart says. It should say it's a fold. We're on the button. 8-4 suited. All right, so it's on the edge, right? And these players are loose and splashy. So I think that in that case, then maybe it makes it a raise because it didn't say they were aggressive, right? It said they were loose and splashy. So I'm going to go with a raise. Wrong. Okay. Too weak because you're facing likely face aggression. Well, they said loose and splashy. It didn't say aggressive. See, when I think of loose and splashy, that means that people are calling too much and, they'll play with you and all like that, and you have bluffing opportunities. But if they were loose aggressive, yeah, it's a fold because they're going to 3-bet you, way too often. But that's just a misinterpretation of his definitions. So it's a fold. Yeah, I'm with it. 25 deep, everyone folds 2 in the cutoff with ace-7 off. Believe that's a raise. Cutoff. Let's see here. Ace-7 off. Yep, that's a raise. Yep. Ace-X is better. Yeah, see, that's the reason, too, because you're blocking somebody else having an ace, and when you make an ace, you're going to win more often in this stack depth. And if you make it 2 big blinds, you have 23 left, and just the big blind defends. There's like 5 in the pot, right? You have a 5-to-1 stack to pot ratio. If the flop comes off with an ace on it, you can check and effectively play your hand as a trap. The turn comes off and you can bet and get a call, and the river comes off and a player, will check to you again. You'd be surprised how often you can then jam a full pot bet on the river with ace-7 and get called by second or third pair in that scenario. Because if somebody else had an ace, they would have let you know about it. So that's a really good one because it comes up quite often where you've played a weak ace because of your stack depth. You can now play. You can't play ace-7 offsuit with 80 blinds, right? Like, check it out. 80 big blinds asking the same question. Well, I guess you can because you have enough chips. Where's the one where ace-7 off goes away in the cutoff? I know that there's one. 25, 15? Maybe not. Maybe ace-7 is the golden boy. Well, either way, getting your whole stack in, it's still the same concept. You wouldn't want to get your whole stack in with 80 big blinds, on the flop or by the river if you only had one pair of aces because you're most likely beat. But when you have 25 blinds to start the hand, it's very reasonable to do. I would have thought ace-7 would have dropped off. Maybe I'm playing my cutoff too tightly. Interesting. 25 deep, everyone folds to the small blind with 8-5 off. Player in the big blind plays well. I believe it's a call. Is it a call? Let me think. Yeah, I think 8-5 off is a call. Yeah. All right. Let's look at the charts. Small blinds. So this is 25 big blinds deep, 8-5 off. Yeah, it's a call. Cool. 100% of the time. Sweet. Good hand to see a cheap flop. Right, and if he raises, you just fold. You don't need to defend this one. Now, if it was suited, the 8-5 suited right here, you're coming in for a raise because of its intrinsic value. If you get 3-bet, you're folding. But if the player calls, you can then take the betting lead or you can make a good hand. So let's go ahead and mark this as complete. And we'll start the next section.
Now let's discuss when you raise and then someone 3-bets you when you're playing between 22 and 35 big blinds deep. As always, what is your opponent's strategy? You need to be paying attention and adjusting according to whatever you think your opponents are doing incorrectly. So against a straightforward opponent who's only 3-betting with the absolute best hands, you should just be folding almost everything. Against a lunatic, a maniac, who is 3-betting you a ton, you have to defend with a much larger portion of your range, either by 4-betting or by calling. As always, consider your pot odds and post-flop playability. Some hands are more than happy to see a flop, even getting marginal implied odds, whereas other hands would rather 4-bet. And usually when you're 4-betting at this stack depth, it's going to be all in. Because, think about it, if someone raises to 2 big blinds, well, you raise to 2 big blinds, they make it 6 or 7. If you're going to 4-bet, you're not going to put in 14 big blinds out of your 35 big blind stack because that's already 40-something-ish% of your stack, in which case you might as well just be all in. So in this scenario, when you do 4-bet, it is almost always going to be all in.
Anytime you're going to make a raise that puts more than a third of your chips in the pot, just jam. Whether you're bluffing or doing it for value, just jam. If you have 40 blinds and you make it 2.5, or we're not talking about that. Okay, we'll say, like you said, 30. You make it 2 big blinds, somebody raises to 6, let's say, a small re-raise, and it comes back to you. Yeah, you can call it, but if you have a hand like ace queen or ace jack suited or pocket, 7s or something like that, just jam, because your next raising option, even if you have pocket aces, right? Your next raising option is to like 15 if you go on the small side, and that's going to look super strong. You've got half your fucking chips in the pot. So just jam the goddamn thing in. People are way too passive. They got the safety on, man, and you can't have the safety on. You got to be able to pull the trigger. Don't hold anything back. The no limit hold'em is about pressure.
Also realize, against some players, you should have some 4-bet bluffs all in your range. You do not want to get in the habit of only 4-betting with the absolute best hands, because then it makes your opponent's life easy.
Blocker hands. King Jack. You have an opponent in the big blind who 3-bets quite often, okay? He's a big stack. He's got like 100 blinds. You have 30, 35. You make an open on the button. He 3-bets to 6 big blinds, most of the time. You have King Jack offsuit. Perfectly fine to just rip it in his face, because he's not going to be able to defend often enough. And because you have a king and a jack in your hand, or a hand like ace 5, offsuit or suited, whatever. Any one of those rag aces, right, that normally seems like shit, because you're holding an ace in your hand, you're going to have the actual real world hand advantage against him, even though you might not have the range advantage, because of the fact that he's decreased the value of his range by 3-betting so often. So you have to be willing to jam. There was just one in the last tournament session I played 2 days ago, where we were on the bubble. We were on the literal bubble, and this one player was super aggressive, and this is kind of different, but it's very similar. We were on the literal bubble, or 2 away from the cash, and I was a low mid stack. I had like 15 blinds or 13 blinds, something like that, and he was raising from first position on my blind, and this player was raising a ton of hands because it's the bubble, and he's got the big stack, and it's okay. And he had like 50 blinds. It came back to me, and I thought about it forever with ace 3 suited, and I was like, you know what? This is that spot where I can rejam very profitably because his range has been deteriorated by the amount of times he's raising. It would be a hell of a coincidence if he had gotten great hands the last 6 times that he raised, which is 6 of the last 7, or what was it? 6 of the last like 10 hands he had raised pre-flop, and everybody had just folded for the most part because we were near the bubble. So I jammed, and of course he folded. And it's just one of those things you have to realize what your opponent does to their own range based on their frequencies, how often they're getting in the pot.
First off, they can 3-bet you a lot because they know you're only going to be 4-betting with the absolute best hands, in which case they can fold all their junk. And also, if you become known as a player who just doesn't get out of line, and that's actually true, your opponents can kind of run you over consistently with small amounts of aggression, and that's going to result in your stack slowly being depleted, which is detrimental in a tournament. You want to be the person who they are afraid to 3-bet because you just might jam it in really wide and make them fold out a hand that has...
There's a great example here in the real world of poker that people will know. Dan Harrington. Dan Harrington has one of the most ironic nicknames in poker. Action Dan Harrington. And he got that name because he was perceived as so tight for so long until poker became popular on TV and we started seeing Dan's actual hands. He was perceived as one of the tightest players you could ever imagine. Tighter than Phil Hellmuth. And people were just like, yeah, that's Action Dan over there. He only plays aces and kings. You know what I'm saying? But meanwhile, he was winning tournaments. And it's like, how the fuck did he do that? You know what I'm saying? He was just like the luckiest guy in the world? No. He was actually finding the spots and preserving his range with those spots with strategical, surgical precision. And there's a great hand, if you ever look it up on YouTube, where Action Dan Harrington is 4-bet bluffing with like 8-4 offsuit. It's the most insane fucking thing you've ever seen in your life from a man who's in his late 60s. Like, the dude is a genius. And that name, Action Dan, is hilarious. And it's funny because people still think of him that way, but I've dealt to the man. I dealt to the man. I saw him play cash. I saw him play tournaments. I talked to him. I read all his books. And this motherfucker was the king of preserving your image. So when he 4-bet you, players went, fuck. Because he would make these raises that were proper and then get 3-bet, but then under defend. He made a mistake, technically, by under defending his opening range versus a 3-bet, especially in position. He should have been defending way more because he just didn't want to get into those situations. But he made the money back by these huge bluffs that he would run when he noticed that the person was just taking advantage of it. So he would 3-bet, they would 4-bet, and then he would make these huge, or he would raise, they would 3-bet, he would make these huge 4-bets, and they would either fold, which paid for all the little raises that he had made before, or they would call because they couldn't believe that, you know, they have this much money in the pot. And then the flop would come down, and no matter what it was, he was going to put so much pressure on you, you couldn't breathe. So, and he would just win the pot so many fucking times. It was amazing to watch up close, and that's a situation where he cut out the middleman of defending the 3-bet and decided to just rip the 4-bet range insanely wide. And it scared people. So his image was known to be super tight. So that nickname Action Dan Harrington stuck with him because they thought he was just a nit. And then poker started coming out on TV, and people go, oh my God, he is Action Dan Harrington. He is the guy who's got the most adrenaline going at the table at all times, and he's amazingly intelligent. But people still fall for it. Like you still couldn't counteract it. It was so well done. Even if you saw his hands, you were still like, fuck, is this one of those? Because a lot of motherfuckers then just got aces shown to them so many times that people just started avoiding him completely again, even after it was on TV.
Plenty of equity. So you pretty much should have bluffs in your range against most people besides the absolute tightest, most straightforward opponents. Let's take a look at this same scenario we've looked at a few times before. You raise a 2.5 big blinds with ace-jack offsuit on the button, and then, you raise the low jack to 2.5 big blinds with ace-jack offsuit, and then the button 3-bets you to 7.5 big blinds out of his 30 big blind stack. You may find that raise sizes get a little bit smaller as stacks get shallower, but...
Another fine point I've made, I've got to bring it up a couple times. It says out of his 30 big blind stack. So the opponent's stack is effective. The opponent has the effective stack. If we have 100 blinds, this hand plays the exact same way, right? If we raise, the opponent makes it 7.5, and we have 100 blinds, but he only has 30. We're playing a 30 big blind effective stack. If it, it folds back to us. If we have a hand that we would jam with 30 big blinds here, you still jam it. You're putting the 30 big blind stack all in. These concepts still apply when you're the bigger stack. Remember that. It's the effective stack that matters. And this is the thing people fuck up. They go, well, I had 80 blinds. The other guy had 30 in this scenario, so I just folded it. Well, what would you have done with 30 in that scenario? Oh, I would have jammed. Then that's what you should have done. You got it wrong.
This all applies. So in this scenario, against a nit, you have a very, very easy fold because the nit's not 3-bet bluffing you much at all. Same actually goes against a calling station. You may say, isn't a calling station playing?
Don't forget the nit, all like that. You see the VPIP of 10 and the preflop raise of 5. That's how we're defining them using a HUD. You know, small played preflop, small raise preflop. 30% VPIP, that's a calling station if his raise is as low. So he's like 35, 30/5, then he's just a calling station. He's just going to defend everything. If their preflop raise is almost the same as their VPIP, then they're loose aggressive, right? So you can just go all in against them.
Playing a lot of hands? Well, they are playing a lot of hands, but they're usually playing them in a relatively passive manner. So you're going to find that when a calling station 3-bets you, it's usually going to be a pretty strong hand. And if it's a pretty strong hand, then...
Basically, if the person doesn't raise very much, fold against it. If they raise a lot, jam against it. If they're balanced, if they're in the, 15 to 20, or right around 18. If they're like 18 raise preflop, then yeah, you can stay balanced and go from there.
Just fold. Because you're not getting very good implied odds. Against a loose aggressive player, a maniac, you definitely want to just be all in with a hand like ace-jack offsuit. This is a good, strong, high-card blocker hand that you can very confidently put your money in with. And against a tight aggressive player, you're actually in a pretty tough spot, and you need to stay balanced. You're going to find a hand like ace-jack offsuit is right on the cusp of playability against a tight aggressive player. Like, let's say they fall right in here on this graph, where they are pre-flop raising, let's say, 12% of the time, or 13% of the time. Against those types of players, you want to fold. If you're against a more loose and aggressive pre-flop raiser, you're going to want to probably go all in. So you're almost treating those players more as loose aggressive players and tight aggressive players. So let's talk about implied odds as we do get shallower. Facing an initial raise, right? If someone raises to 2 big blinds out of their 25 big blind effective stack, in that scenario, you are calling 2 big blinds to potentially win a pot of 6.5 big blinds plus the 23 big blinds remaining in your stacks. You do the math here. That gives you 14.75 to 1 implied odds, which, is not quite the required 20 to 1 implied odds you need with suited connectors and suited aces. But if you're in position, if your suited connector and suited ace is generally strong, you can still play those hands by
9-10, 10-jack, 8-9, 8-7. Those are generally strong ones. I'd say 8-7 suited, probably 9-8 suited plus. You can then make this call. You don't want to go much lower than that, though, because when you make 2 pairs, you're going to get beat too often when you have like 5-4 or deuce tray or things like that. So, having like 9-10 definitely is in there. So I'm debating on 8-9. I think it's close. I think it kind of depends on player dependent. I think if I was facing this raise with the 10-9 suited, I'm calling it all day long, no matter what. My impression of the player is, as long as they're not just excessively aggressive on the turn. If they bet all flops, that's fine, because everybody does that, who are bad players. But if they bet 100% of turns, you just want to fold that one pre-flop. 10-jack, you can still call it because it is super premium. But other than that, you kind of got to get out of the way.
By calling. You should not be playing the weaker suited connectors, though, or the marginal suited aces like ace-6 suited. Like if someone raises before you and then you have ace-6 suited in later position, you should probably just fold. But
you can play ace-5 to ace-deuce because of the wheel combos, and you can play ace-9 and ace-8 because of their intrinsic value.
Scenario we're discussing when you're facing a 3-bet. So if you raise to 2 big blinds and someone 3-bets you to 5.5 big blinds out of their 25 big blind effective stack, now you're calling 3.5 to potentially win the 13.5 pot plus the 19.5 big blinds remaining in the stacks, which gives you 9.4 to 1 implied odds, which means the marginal suited aces and the marginal suited connectors are nowhere near good enough to play. And even then, these small pairs are borderline, right? So understand that in this scenario, when you are facing a 3-bet, you're almost never going to be getting the correct implied odds to call with hands where your intention is to only continue if you flop a really strong hand. So, for that reason, you're going to find that calling a 3-bet at this stack depth is usually only ideal when you have a hand that flops amazingly well, like Jack-10 suited or King-Queen suited, or your really strong slow play hands like pocket aces that you don't mind letting your opponent stay in the pot. So you're going to find you really don't want to be doing a ton of calling at this stack depth. Well, let's take a look at this scenario where under the gun +2, that's you raise, and then the cutoff 3-bets you, and then also when you raise under the gun +2 and the big blind 3-bets you, 25 big blinds deep. So as we see here, we are going all in for value with the good strong pairs, right? When we are out of position. We're also going all in with a few selected bluffs. I have pocket eights as a bluff. That is, kind of a value hand as well. The line gets a little bit blurry. King jack suited and ace 5 suited. So we see just a pretty strong condensed range we're jamming with. Then we're calling with pocket aces as a slow play.
Again, this is another one where only 1.1% of hands are being played. That's 5% of the time. You can throw away the all-in as a bluff and just play the king jack for a call, right? Play the ace 5 as a call and play the pocket eights as a call. You know what I'm saying? Or if you wanted to truly balance it, you could just keep the pocket eights as an all-in, but not as a bluff, as a value hand. So that's how you make this real world playable, is kind of mitigating the smallest ones. Like king jack and ace 5 become a call, cool. Pocket eights becomes a jam for value, not for bluff.
Play ace jack offsuit, and then the good suited connected hands, right? All the good strong high card suited connected hands, and then a few of the lower pairs, because again, we are getting right at the correct implied odds to call, so these hands can still call. If we were facing a bigger 3-bet size, or if we were even shallower stacked, we would probably be playing these hands a little bit differently. From in position, our opponent will be using a slightly bigger 3-bet size against us, which is going to result in us folding out a little bit more. But as you see, we are still continuing primarily with just the good, strong, high suited connected hands, right? And that all makes sense. Let's take a look at when we were a little bit deeper. We'll compare these two. Notice in this situation, when we are under the gun, when we raise under the gun +2 and the cutoff 3-bets us, we're actually calling or continuing with, 78% of hands. We're folding 22% of the 100% we're playing. So you see here we're folding 22%. Compare that to this scenario, though, when we're shallower stacked. We're now folding 40%. So we're folding significantly more often to a 3-bet as we get shallower and shallower. And that is definitely important to note. Same things happening over here even when we are in position. We get to call with more hands when we are in position, or when we are deeper stacked in general. And that's because we're getting better implied odds. Now let's take a look, cutoff versus button and cutoff versus big blinds. This is a looser range. Given we are raising a looser range and we are against later position 3-betters who should also have looser ranges in turn, you'll find that we do need to continue a little bit more often, but still, we're folding a pretty good chunk of the time. You see 45% when we are against the button and 50% when we're against the big blind, who again uses a slightly bigger size. You see again a strong, condensed, all-in strategy of just the good, strong, high card hands. You see pocket aces slow playing in both instances. And then the calling range is made up of mostly good, strong, implied odds hands that also have just like good high card value, right? You see you're not continuing stuff like 6-5 suited facing a bigger raise size. Against a smaller raise size, it's close, but the marginal suited connectors like 9-7 suited, 8-6 suited, etc. are pretty much always folding. Also notice these offsuit hands really don't like continuing. Only the absolute best high card hands do get to call, like king queen, right? King queen. And in this scenario, we saw ace jack offsuit perhaps gets to call as well. So yeah, that's what we're doing in these scenarios. Realize that we do have bluffs in all of these charts. This is the type of thing that makes people uncomfortable. Say you do raise the cutoff and the button 3-bets you should be all in with ace 6 suited. You should be all in with king 10 suited if the big blind 3-bets you and the low pocket pairs. And realize that this is going to cause big swings in your game, but that is okay. You are going to experience swings when you're playing poker, and if you are not jamming these hands against your strong and loose aggressive opponents, you're just going to be folding out way, way, way too often. And if anything, you should probably be jamming even wider if you know your opponent is a loose and aggressive player. So if you wanted to add a few more hands, let's say this chart against the big blind, maybe you add ace 9 suited, king 9 suited, ace 8 suited, stuff like that. Perhaps ace 10 offsuit. perhaps king, queen offsuit. I think just ripping it in with those hands is perfectly viable. Maybe even ace nine offsuit, king jack offsuit, using a bit more of a polarized strategy. I think that would be perfectly fine if you know your opponent's 3-betting you too often. Let's compare this chart to the 40 big blind charts. Again, you see just way less folding when we are deeper stacked. So you're going to see that pattern applies. See 45%.
This is the concept. The reason why he's hammering it home, this is the concept of having more money on the table. If you're at a 1-2 game, just to make it simple, and you have, $40 in front of you, you have 20 blinds, right? So you're going to be raising less with the intention of folding to a 3-bet because you have less to risk. Even though you have more chips in a tournament, you have less blinds, you have less effect on the game. So there are less blinds in the tournament, but even of those, you have less. So your stack has to become played differently. Now, if you're in that same 1-2 game and you have a full buy-in of 100 blinds, $200, what I'm saying, then you can call more because when you hit your hand, you have the ability to make the money you need on the implied odds. You have the 20-1 with the suited connectors. You have the 10-1, with the pocket pairs, things like that. So you don't have to fold as much because there is a chance to win more. When you don't have as much in front of you, you don't have a chance to win more. So your implied odds just go away. So it makes it completely unprofitable just to call. Last night while I was playing, I made a raise and a player 3-bet me, and I had the ace-5 of, or ace-3 of hearts. And it was a small 3-bet, and it was from the button, and I was in the cutoff. And, this is a Zoom game, so it plays a little bit tighter, and it's 6 max, so, there's a compensation there. The flop comes off a king and 2 middle hearts. Like, it was like king 9, 8, or something like that, and 2 hearts. And the player bet 3/4 of the pot. And, okay, if I hit the heart, I win. Cool. But I'm not getting the correct odds to call because I'm only going to hit my card that wins the pot for me, exclusively 8 of those. Because if the king of hearts comes out right, he can just have a full house, right? But let's take that out of the mix. Let's say there's 9 good cards for me. I'm only going to hit it on the turn 18% of the time. I'm only going to hit it by the river about 36% of the time, which means that if I was guaranteed that he would check the turn, I could call for sure. But I'm only going to get to see one card a lot. This player 3-bet pre-flop. He bet big on the flop. He's telling me he has a good hand, either ace-king or pocket aces or pocket queens or something like that, or pocket kings, and he's not willing to get away from it for cheap. He's going to charge me way too much. And I just folded it. And I explained that very quickly, and I just folded it. And comments kind of argued with me for a while, saying that, your expected value is this and that and the other and that. True, but I'm not going to get to realize the equity enough. That's a scenario where I had a lot of blinds, but not a lot of hope to realize the equity because when I hit the heart, let's say I call it. Let's say I make an improper call and the heart comes on the turn. Is this guy going to pay me his whole stack with one pair? No. So I'm not going to get the implied odds I need. Same concept on the other end. If you don't have enough money in front of you to draw for those odds, then you don't have it. You know what I'm saying? That's a scenario where if you had opened the ace-5 suited with 25 blinds in the cutoff and the small or big blind had just called or whatever, and you flop 2 hearts, well, then you're just going to play aggressively and try to get it in because you need that double. You know what I'm saying? So if he leads at you and you just, if you raise and he jams on you, you can easily call in that stage of a tournament because you need to double up to get in this thing to make a run at winning it. You know what I'm saying? Granted, the stages of the tournament kind of matter. If you're right on the bubble, maybe you don't do it. If you're on the final table bubble, maybe you don't do it, depending on if your 25 big blinds is like a top 5 stack. Maybe you don't do it. But in the mid stages of a tournament, after you've cashed especially, 100% you're going to go with that there because the times you win it are going to make you more money than busting the tournament now. You know what I'm saying? You bust the tournament now, you made a small cash, woohoo, it sucks. But if you win it, you're going to go on much further in the tournament. So your expected value can be mitigated by the fact of your placing going up. So just a couple side thoughts that I thought needed to be mentioned here.
And on this chart, when we were shallower, compared to 32% when we are playing 40 big blinds deep. So you generally get to call more as you get deeper and deeper stacked, just due to having better implied odds. Now, so far we've been discussing when you're facing a 3-bet that is not all in. However, you will find at this stack depth, once we start to get down to 25 big blinds, sometimes you will be facing an all-in, especially as you start trickling lower and lower and lower. This is actually going to come up a lot as we get shallower and shallower. Usually, though, if you're playing something like 30 big blinds deep and you raise it 2 big blinds, you're not going to face an all-in all that often, but, every once in a while you will. So, always ask, what are my pot odds? And then usually you want to build in a little bit of an edge to make sure that you're calling off profitably. And then you want to figure out which hands are getting the correct price to call. So, let's take a look at a scenario. Let's say in this spot, everyone folds to you in the cutoff, you raise with king jack suited, and then the player on the button, who is a loose aggressive player, goes all in. Okay? Well, right off the bat, let's figure out our pot odds. Okay? In this scenario, we have to put in how much? Well, we do 2,500 minus our initial raise equals 2,275 to win a total pot of our 2,500, our opponent's 2,500, plus the 250 from the small blind, big blind, and ante, so that is 5,250 equals. So we need 43% equity plus a few more percents. Let's call it 45% to break even. Okay? Now we just have to figure out, what do we think this player is jamming? Well, who knows? It could be all over the place. Lots of the time, you'll find that most people call their absolute best hands. Usually they're jamming a bit more of a condensed range of just good high equity hands. Again, this is pure speculation on my part. Who knows what they're actually jamming with? But let's say they're jamming, if this is a loose aggressive player, maybe they're jamming something like this, opting to call a lot of these good hands in the middle or 3-bet them small, right? So let's say they're using this strategy. Okay? On Equilab, we go to Tools, Hand Range Calculator, and now we need 45% equity to justify calling. And in this case, you'll actually see that we can call pretty wide. And that's because our opponent is 3-betting all in with so many marginal-ish hands. So
the only part of that I would argue with is that the king jacks, or that the ace jack suited and the ace queen suited are still being jammed by most loose aggressive players because they just need a green light and they're not playing those hands as properly. They're playing them as ace jack offsuit and ace queen offsuit, which they would automatically jam. They don't understand the difference. Most loose aggressive players don't understand the difference of having the flush draw and how much more profitable it is just to call there in a situation where you have a flush draw and can easily dominate an opening hand like king jack. If you have ace jack suited and you just call it pre-flop, you are in such good shape versus the king jack, versus when you jam it, the king jack gets away most of the time. But loose aggressive players don't understand that, so they're going to jam it anyway. So I would have put that in his jamming range, and it would have affected the odds a little differently for me. That being said, the king jack is still a call here.
Pretty much all of these hands are going to be in our pre-flop raising range from the cutoff, besides perhaps these low ace-x offsuits. So against a loose aggressive player in this spot, if they're using this strategy where they're not jamming their best hands and they're only jamming all in with the strongish condensed range, you actually get to call off pretty wide with your good hands. So do not be afraid to make these calls. If I was playing this in-game, I would probably fold out these hands here. I'd probably call off with something like this, though. Maybe not king 10 suited, but king jack suited is definitely going to be a call. And I think this calling range is pretty reasonable. Now, let's change this up a bit and say instead of being a loose aggressive player, our opponent was just a tight player who was only jamming with hands they thought were very good, which will be the case against a lot of players, especially in live poker, who are weak, tight, straightforward. They're just going to take their best hands and rip them in because they really don't want to get outdrawn. Their jamming range may be something like this. Against this range, you're going to see you can't really call much of anything. You can only call it off with pocket nines or better and ace queen and better, which is not a whole lot. So you see, your opponent's strategy in this situation is very, very important. And you want to be observing the frequency at which they are going all in. Some people are going to go all in very often once they get down to 25 or 30 big blinds after a pre-flop raise, and other players are going to be very, very tight and not jam all that often. And when they do jam, it's often going to be with a hand like ace jack offsuit. There's certainly a profitable shove, but it still loses to a lot of these strong high card hands. So always pay attention to your opponent's strategy and realize that as their range gets wider and wider, or weaker and weaker, you should in turn call off wider. And a lot of players in This situation, just fold this king jack suited every single time, and that is a big mistake. What actually happened this time? We did call them, and we end up winning the pot with the king high, so that's fortunate. But people will jam pretty frequently on you, especially if they think you are going to be a little bit weak. I mean, in many ways, like you can be a little bit weak because they think you're raising kind of tight, but you're just going to fold almost everything to the all-in. Or perhaps they think that you're going to be a little bit weak because you're raising way too wide from the cutoff. A good exploit against a lot of players is to raise very wide from the button and the cutoff with the idea that they're just going to fold to your raise frequently, which very easily could be true. But if your opponents start to realize what you're doing and they're willing to adjust to exploit you, then that's going to result in them jamming on you a lot of the time. And if you're raising very wide but folding to the jam way too often, you are going to become extremely exploitable. So always make sure you are paying attention to what your opponents are doing incorrectly. Be aware of your own strategy, and also do your best to figure out, will my opponents actually do anything about it? But realize, in this situation, whenever you're facing an all-in before the flop, all you have to do is assess your opponent's range accurately. And if you do that, it's just a math problem. And fortunately, math problems are pretty easy to solve using the tools that are completely free and available to you.
And this is why you practice with these things away from the table. I personally am about 10 months ago, and I was doing fairly well. I revisited this scene and realized that I wasn't jamming at 25 big blinds near enough. So I had immediately adopted the strategy, and no joke, that day I won a tournament, and I can attribute it directly to doing that. I'm now a big fan of the move of jamming from the button or the small blind when you see an open and late position with just good blockers at 25 big blinds or less, because you end up in so many situations where your hand is not strong enough to call and a little too weak to 3-bet, but jamming just makes the opponent have so much pressure on him that they just go, I just put 2 blinds in there and this guy wants to play for 25, fuck that. And then you just pick up all these pots that have 5 blinds in them because, the blinds and antes in his open, you know what I'm saying? And that gets you from 25 blinds to 30. And again, gets you, to 35 and then to 40, you know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. And then you're playing in a different blind range where now you can start opening and 3-betting again. And you're just much less handcuffed. I did find that I cashed less often. Maybe it was a difference of 10%, which is not insignificant. It's very big. But I was winning more often. So the actual money that I was winning was way more. So, and when I did cash tournaments, I would go much further. And here's the other thing. You jam a hand like, King Jack there. Yeah, you're going to be dominated sometimes. But even when you're dominated by King Queen or Ace King or Ace Jack or, King Jack or Queen Jack or something like that. Ace Jack or Ace King or something like that. You're still going to win 30% of the time. And if you're suited, if you're playing properly and it's suited, you're going to still win like 35% of the time. So even when you make the mistake versus the actual hand, not versus the range you were fine, you're still going to win 35% of the time. And, that's a great benefit too. So it puts a lot of strength in either calling off with those hands like King Jack or jamming them yourself. So just bear that in mind, and I think it's something that everybody should look at in their own game. It was a huge difference for me. And it sucks because it's not really one of those that I can over exploit like I was because of my bankroll right now. Like now I need more cashes than anything else. So I kind of have to back off a little bit, but I still go to that move quite often on the daily. Probably at a frequency of 80% of the time that I would do it normally on a proper bankroll. So it's not that much of a difference, but I need the extra cashes, so I have to give up some of those spots. Let's do the quiz. 2 big blinds out of your 25 big blind stack from 5-5 from the low jack. Button 3 bets to 7 big blinds. Can you profitably call? Well, let's do the math. It's kind of close, but let's do it. So we bring out the calculator. And it's going to cost us 5 big blinds. That's not close. It's going to cost us 5 big blinds to win the opponent's 25 big blind stack, our raise, which makes 27, plus the blinds and antes for another 2.5. That makes 29.5. So we divide by 29.5. We have to win 16% of the time. Sounds good, but here's the thing. 29.5 divided by the 5 blind call. We're only getting 5.9 to 1. So we need 10 to 1. We don't have enough chips here. If he had made it 4 big blinds, then yes, we could call. But we don't have enough chips. So it is a fold all day long. No, you cannot profitably call. Don't have the correct implied odds just because we simply don't have enough chips. We need to have like 40 blinds to make this call. 2 big blinds out of 30. King 10 off from the cutoff. A tight player, small bets, or a tight player in the small blind 3 bets. Can you profitably call? Well, it's a pretty tight player. Kind of hard to say, but let's go ahead and figure it out. King 10 off is obviously not the one. So we're going to be calling 5.5 to win 32 plus the big blind and the ante. So that's 34. So we're going to go 34 divided by 5.5. 6 to 1. Nope. Right. Don't have the correct implied odds because your hand does not play well in 3-bet pots and is often dominated. Now, if it was suited, you could probably jam this one versus a lot of loose aggressive players, but not against a tight player. You raised 2 out of your 35 big blind stack now from the low jack. Loose aggressive player 3 bets to 6. Should you continue? I'm going to say off the top of my head, yes, but let's go ahead and check it out. Oh, I had brought up the calendar, not the calculator. Where's the calculator? All right. So he made it 6, so it costs us 4. So there's 35 in the middle, plus the 2 is 37. He's on the button, plus the blinds and antes. That's 39.5. It costs us, so 39.5 divided by the 4 big blinds additional. It's 6, right? We put in 2 divided by 4. So we're getting 9.875 from a loose aggressive player. It's not good enough. It just says, should you continue? It doesn't say, should you call? This is one where I think I'm gaming the game. He's on the button, too. You know what? It's still a fold. We shouldn't continue, I don't think. Wrong. Oh, you have more implied odds in Stap Deck. You should probably profitably call. But I only got 9.8. But it is 9.8. It is 9.8 suited. That's the thing. All right. Maybe that's a little tight. You know what? If you ask me with 9-10 suited, would I call? Yes. So when it's that close, I think that's correct. 9-8 suited, you should call. All right, that's cool. I'm gonna mark this as complete, and we're gonna go back.
Now let's discuss
to the
when you are
courses.
facing limpers with a 20.
I'm gonna go back to the courses. I'm gonna bring this up. I want to see how many sections are left here. So we are in this section. First 2 are complete, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more spots of this blind level to go. This one will have a new on YouTube and on Twitch, but those go away. It'll have a new thumbnail. So this section of 22 to 35 big blinds is going to have this thumbnail that I made. You'll see this is going to be part 1, and this is Wake Up With Me number 64. So you'll see that filled in, and this will be on YouTube if you want to look at it. This section is 22 to 35 big blinds. It's going to probably take us like 6 or 7 sessions to get through it. Yeah. I think today is a play day. So it's going to be tournaments probably in about an hour and a half or so. Might not be. I kind of have to see how I feel. But we'll see. If I don't play tournaments, then I'm going to play some cash. So I'll be back in a little while. And I don't see... actually, let me see. Yeah, I'm going to send you guys off to a host. One of my favorite streamers. You've probably seen her by now. But if you haven't, you're in for a treat because she's really funny. Plays fun games. Plays Dead by Daylight a lot. So I'll send you guys off to her. Have a great day. And I'll see you later.